Okay, thanks for coming to join today's session. So today is a EMBA faculty showcase. And before that, just introduce myself. My name is Johnny, and I'm an assistant director from business development marketing departments. And also I'm the MBA program advisor. So in today's sessions, in the very beginning, so I will do a very quick briefing about our programs for you have understanding how the programs looks like. Okay, today this is the today of agenda. So we have part one. I will briefing the programs, very quick one, and followed by the masterclass showcase, which is our Professor Cedomir, and followed by our Professor Jamus Lim. The topic is mastering the power of geopolitics, and followed by the Asia's emerging market, then followed by the Q&A sessions. So if you have any questions, for the online audience, you can raise up your questions in Q&A sessions, and our Prof will address the questions later on. And for the guests in the classrooms, you can raise your questions later on, and our panelists will address the questions. Okay, so just give you a brief introduction about ESSEC Business School. We are the French business school, sorry, we are the international business school with the French roots. And in the latest Financial Times ranking, we are number 8 best European business school. And also we are the school have all the triple crown accreditations, ESSEC, EMBA, and Economies. Just for information, in current this world, only less than 1% of the university and the business school have all the triple crown accreditation. So when you're looking for business program, especially MBA or EMBA program, it is a great for the school or for the program have all the triple crown accreditations. And this is about our programs ranking. So in the Financial Times 2022 executive education ranking, we are number 6. And in the QS university ranking for our EMBA program, which is the number 11 best strong EMBA, global EMBA program, and we are number 2 in terms of a career outcome and the diversity. So this program is a joint degree, is a partnership between ESSEC Business School and the Mannheim Business School from German. So when you complete the programs in the 15 months durations, you will get basically 3 certificates, one from ESSEC Business School, one from Mannheim Business School, and another one from French Ministry of Education. Okay, talking about the candidates profile. So for this class, what kind of the participant profiles looks like? You can see from here, the program is designed for middle to top management level, which is the C-suite level of the people, of which age around 40 years. And we are looking for participants have at least 8 years working experience, which at least 3 years in the manager role or in the leadership role. And of which class size for this program in APAC around 25. And by the way, the programs deliver in 3 places at the same time. So we have one group in Paris, in our La Défense group, in our La Défense campus, and one group in Mannheim Business School, and one group in Singapore campus. So the total cohort size for the program should be 75 to 80, and in Singapore itself is around 20 to 25. Okay, and how the program's curriculum looks like. And when I promoting this program, a lot of people asking, what is the major or what's your track under your EMBA program? Is it focused on marketing? Is it focused on business? Is it focused on the economic? Actually, my answer is that our program is very customized and which is focused on Asia business. So you can see the module display here. So we have a 5 big portion, which is the first one, understanding Asia and the new business models in Asia, and followed by the digital trade, which is our program have involved a lot of a digital transformation topic, and followed by innovation and the managing business growth. The 4th portion, which is the responsibility, leadership, and personal development. So leadership involvement is also one very big portion under this program. And the last one, which is we have this innovation, entrepreneurship, and sensibility project. Besides for this program, they have a 2 overseas residence program, which is 1 week in Mannheim Business School and 1 week in USA, Georgetown University. So both schools are our partner universities. Okay, how the program structure looks like. So this is a 15 months modular program. We not really see this as a part-time because when you're attending the class, you need to join the class from Monday to Saturday. So each day you will have at least 6 to 7 hours engagement with the lecture with your classmates. So the total, they have a 10 times class on campus in Singapore. Besides, they have a 2 overseas resident program, which is just I mentioned, 1 week in German and 1 week in USA. And lastly, this program will involve this innovation, entrepreneurship, and accessibility project. Okay, this is the program's schedule looks like. So by every year, the program will start on October. You can see the red color highlight. And basically every month, you will have a 1 week class, either in first week or in the second week. And in the blue color, you can see by February and July, which is overseas residence program. So by February, we will go to Mannheim Business School to stay there for 1 week. And by July, we will go to USA to stay with the Georgetown University. And by November, which is the Singapore residence program. So for our Mannheim Business School and Paris campus students, they will come to Singapore to stay with us. And in between, by August, we have these online modules, Mannheim online modules. So basically for this month, a student don't need to come to campus. You can just complete the 2 Mannheim online modules through online. And by September and October, we have elective modules. It's an option for candidates to choose, okay, so which area you want to focus to develop yourself. Okay, so basically this is how the program structure looks like. You will start the program by every year, October, and you will graduate by following year, end of December. Okay, so as a recruiter, I think if you are interested for the program, you also want to know how is the application process. So for our EMBA program application process is very unique and is very customized. So we are not request like a standard test like GMAT or GRE because this program is designed for CCO level, top management level of people. So we are more focused on your personal experience. We are more focused on your future career plans. So in terms of start the application, before you start any application, we advise you to speak to the advisor, which is myself and also my colleague Mark. Depends on where the location you are. And after we speak to you to understand your demanding or your need for the programs, we will arrange one chat between you and our program director, academic director. So the purpose of the chat is to understand your profile, to make sure the program is able to help you to achieve your career goals. I think this chat is very detailed, it's very compulsory. It's a platform for you to understand the program better through academic way, through the admission ways. Then followed by after the chat, you can start the application. And after you submit the application, we will go through one round of the formal interview jury. So we will have 2 jury members to interview you through different perspectives to assess your profile. And during the time also, we will determine your scholarship. So later page, I will explain to you how the scholarships works. And after you complete the jury, within 2 to 3 days, you will receive the offer. So this is the whole process for the EMBA application. We do not require standard test, but we need to arrange the initial chat between you and the program director in the beginning. Okay, talking about the scholarship. So for our EMBA program, we are offering these 4 types of the scholarship. There are first mover and early bird. There are Singaporean future leaders, and also have a diversity scholarship, followed by the future women leaders. Depends on your profile, depends on when you submit the application, and it depends on your interview performance. So the scholarship range probably from 10% to 20%, really depends on your profile. And there have 2 scholarship requests you to complete the essay through online, which is the diversity scholarship and the future women leaders. So you have to download the essay ratings, complete the form, and submit your essays with the application together. So for the more information, you can access our website to get more information, and also you can speak to our advisor to get more details about this process. Okay, so I have done my part. I think this very quick one to give you an overall how is the programs looks like and how is the application process. So the next, we will welcome our Professor Cedomir to give the master class showcase. Welcome to Prof.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Jenny. take this. Thank you for this nice presentation and welcome to ESSEC. So when this is a hybrid session. In a hybrid session, we have people in the classroom and we have people online. So remember last year when COVID was still there, and when I started to teach in September, I had 2 students in the classroom and 50 online. Wow, so we didn't know how to handle this. Should I watch the screen or should I look at people in the classroom? So it was not easy at that time. So now we are used to that. So now we are completely schizophrenic. So we do both things at the same time. So for this presentation for today, we have this question about the power of geopolitics. So I am the academic director of the program. I launched it 8 years ago. And when you're looking at the curriculum of programs, you will find some, I would say, fundamental courses. And one of the fundamental courses is about economics. So my dear colleague, Jamus Lim, will talk about this. As Johnny has indicated, we are also putting very much emphasis on the digital transformation. So this is why we also have my dear colleague Lian. She is sitting here. She's not talking today, but she can intervene if necessary. So we have, let's say, a group of professors here who are teaching in the program. We also have people coming from other parts of the world, especially from France, in order to teach in the program, but the majority of them are teaching from this campus here. For today, since I'm teaching geopolitics, so the question was to know, why do we teach geopolitics in a business school? Because very often we have business people telling me, no, I don't want to be involved in politics. I don't sell politics. I'm selling Coca-Cola, I'm selling something else. So why should I be interested in politics? So the main reason why do we have this is that if you don't want to go to politics, they will come to you. And when they come to you, they strike, and it is very hard. So let's take one example for this. The example is coming from the war in Ukraine. So besides all the human loss, besides all the tragic situation that we have here, we also have business consequences. So on this slide, on the left part of the slide, you have all the companies that already decided to pull out of the Russian market or which are in the process of pulling out of the market. We have more than 600 big companies from the whole world deciding to get out for one very simple reason. It is because the Western companies have imposed sanctions on them. So if you have sanctions, in that case, you cannot continue to work. But for many of these companies, this is a very high loss. So on the right side of the slide, you have a certain number of companies which were making business. So you can have cigarette companies, you can have retail companies, everybody was present there, automotive companies. We did not put oil and gas here. This is an additional burden that we have for these companies. So we can say, of course, it is a moral imperative to pull out of the Russian market because of the invasion of the Ukraine. But if you are the CEO of a company and if you are the CFO of the company, you're also looking at figures and figures are showing this. So you have, here is only the turnover, but many of these companies have invested in the country, especially banks or oil and gas companies. Some of them have invested hundreds of millions of dollars in the country. And now you are telling these companies you have to pull out. So the company will ask the president, okay, you tell me to pull out, but who will compensate for the $500 million that I invested there? And they say, nobody. So this is the geopolitical risk that you can have. It is not only a question of politics, it is not only a question of tragedy, which is still there, and we cannot see the end of this tragedy, but from the business point of view, we also have this kind of component. Second example, it is coming from the region that we have here about semiconductors and about foundries. I'm glad to have here a participant in this cohort. Stanley is here. So he is in this industry. So the question that we can have is, what is happening with the situation in Taiwan? So the situation in Taiwan is very important for the semiconductor industry, because on this graph, you have the companies producing this. So we have foundries and we have chips. So here we have the foundries. I can see Taiwan is producing more than 50% of all the wafers that we have in the world. And when we are looking at the list of the companies here, in this list here, you have just one company coming from the United States. It is this one, Global Foundries. So it means that the United States and the other countries, they depend very much on Taiwan. And there is a question. So you can have the president, for instance, President Biden, asking American companies, go to the US and produce in the US. It is easier said than done because the production is very hard to move from one place to the other. You are not alone in this business. You also have the ecosystem, which is around it. So today, we have big uncertainties, not only because Taiwan is representing a big producer, but we also have the rebound of the demand, because during the COVID, the demand was going down. But after that, instead of having, let's say, a slight increase like this one, no, it was a wee increase. So for many of those companies, they didn't have enough. So the demand is there. So we have companies looking for this and they cannot deliver. One example on this is given by this. So the OEMs, which is the original equipment manufacturers, especially when we have, for instance, the situation for the automotive industry, this is the waiting time. So you are waiting 28 weeks, you are waiting 40 weeks, you are waiting 52 weeks for some of the products. 52 weeks, you produce cars. What do? You stop the production because you cannot incorporate something that doesn't exist. So either you stop producing cars or you do something that Volkswagen has done, you remove the chips. So in that case, you are saying we don't have access to a certain number of functions because we don't have the chips going there. So all this to say that it seems to be obvious that all the companies, all the corporations, all business depends on geopolitics. But still, there is a reluctance coming from corporations to involve in this. Because many times, when the corporations are involved in business, we believe corruption, we believe briberies, we believe some, let's say, hidden negotiations and so on. But this is the bread and butter of all corporations, otherwise they cannot work there. So now I will look at the way, how do we teach this? So during the executive MBA, you have 3 days for one course. So 3 days for one course, it means about 25 hours. So 25 hours, here I will talk about 20 minutes. So I cannot put the 25 hours in 20 minutes. So I have to select something. So I will select the most salient element. Geopolitics revolves around 3 things. So we talk about space, we talk about state, and we talk about power. These are the 3 things that we have about geopolitics. The space refers to primarily geography. So this is where geopolitics come from. The state is the actor, and the power is the possibility to influence or the possibility to impose something on the others. So all geopolitics, everything that you can see revolves around these 3 things. So depending on the author, depending on the statesman, depending on the people, they can put emphasis on one of these 3. It is very rare that they are putting the emphasis on all of them, but this is what is happening. Now, how do we address this? We can address this through 4 possibilities. Either we are looking at the classical geopolitics, critical, feminist, or business geopolitics. So I am synthesizing this in this table here. What do they represent? and how are they different one from the other. So we don't have time to enter in details for that. However, I will just precise which one is the most important today. The classical geopolitics is still the most important today. It was the first one to appear, and it is still the dominating one. If you ask any president, if you ask any general who is the chief of staff, if you ask anyone, they are still continuing with the classical view of geopolitics. The other two, critical and feminist, they are fantastic from the intellectual point of view because they present a challenge to the statu quo. They present a challenge to what is existing today. And the business geopolitics is something which is of interest to us today because this is a business school. We are not an institute of political science. We are not an international relations institute. So in business, how business is relating to this. For instance, we will have the three elements here, the corporate space here, the corporation and the sovereignty, and economic power and social power. So those are the three things that I'm going to see right now. The first one, the space. The question is the corporation having a space? Is the corporation having a territory? And is this territory different from the state territory? In that case, we can have a corporation acting like a state in a state. And here is an example coming from Saudi Arabia and the biggest company, Saudi Aramco. And Saudi Aramco has a certain number of compounds. So a compound is one piece of land that you manage. And in this compound, they don't apply the Saudi laws. That is gender segregation, everything that we know in Saudi. On the compound, they don't do this. So this is one way how the physical space, which belongs to the corporation, can have different laws. The second one is the virtual space. So we have colleagues who are much more, let's say, much more expert than me in the virtual space. But from the political point of view, what is interesting in the metaverse or in the virtual space is to know who commands this, who is organizing the metaverse, and who is implementing the laws there. For instance, if I have a metaverse which is coming from Microsoft, will Microsoft rule the metaverse? Or if I have a metaverse which is coming from, I don't know, NVIDIA, will NVIDIA rule the metaverse? And will we have different laws from the laws that we have in the real time? So from our point of view, from the political point of view, if you spend 2 hours in the metaverse, we don't care because the rest of the time you are in the real world. But if you spend 24/7 in the metaverse, it is a completely different situation because the metaverse becomes your space. You don't live outside of the metaverse. So of course, it's hard to imagine this now, but maybe in the future, this is what will happen. So if you spend 24/7 in the metaverse, in that case, the metaverse is your space, the metaverse is your state. So we have to look at the citizenship, we have to look at the sovereignty and so on. So in the metaverse here, you have a certain number of companies. There's a big companies, like you can see, they are all companies coming from the West, except this one. Can you see this one here? Okay. So Tencent is organizing, of course, its own metaverse. So we can have a certain number of companies which are, let's say, cooperating, because here in the list, you don't have only companies from Tencent, you have external players, but Tencent has also its own ecosystem. So in its own ecosystem, it means that they can rely on many of these companies. Either the companies fully belong to Tencent, either Tencent has a participation in these companies. So it means that Tencent can be a big player in the metaverse. In the Western world, we forget about the Chinese players, but in this part of the world, we cannot forget about them. So we also have to look at what they are doing. This was for the space. The second thing is the state. So for the state, we have a question about the sovereignty. Who is sovereign? Is it the corporation or is it the state? So usually we consider that the state is sovereign and the corporation has to obey to the state. But reality can be a little bit different because of the two elements of sovereignty that we have here. The first element of sovereignty is the currency, and the second one is the army. So for the currency, in the past, we used to have a certain number of corporations issuing their own currency. This was the time of the merchant kings, that is starting in the year 1600 and going to the 1900. And one example of this is the British East India Company. So this was the banknote that they were issuing. At that time, the British East India Company was much more powerful than any state in the region. So they had their own currency, and the other states were accepting the currency which was coming from the corporation. Today, we can have, let's say, private printers. So this is one example coming from Hong Kong. So the printer is HSBC. So the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation, they are printing the Hong Kong dollars. So of course, they don't have monetary policy because it is the monetary authority of Hong Kong telling them something to do. But at the end of the day, you have a banknote, and on the banknote, you have the logo of HSBC. You don't have the logo of the monetary authority of Hong Kong. So we have a private printer, even they don't have, of course, freedom concerning the monetary policy. This can happen with the new banknotes, okay? So this is an example of the new banknote in the future. And they asked one designer in order to imagine what would it be. So for you, we are saying this is impossible. But let's talk in 50 years. And let's see in 50 years what may happen. So they imagine the name of the bank, and you see the name of the bank. It is called Worldwide Bank. Huh? The name of the currency is units. Usually, when you have banknotes, who is signing the banknotes? It is the governor of the bank signing the banknote. Who is signing the banknote here? Mark Zuckerberg. He is signing his own banknote. So today, it seems impossible. But maybe in the future, it can happen. What we have today, of course, is the cryptocurrencies. They are practically all private. And Zuckerberg wanted to launch its own one, which was the Libra at that time. And for the Libra Association, we have plenty of big players here. So one big player was Visa. Another big player was MasterCard. So some of these big players have left. They have renamed the currency into DM. So if you are looking at DM Association today, here you have the partners. So you know some of the partners, but you probably know this one, okay? It is called Temasek. Huh? So this one is also present in DM. So we'll see in the future how this is going to be unfolded. This is for the currency. Now concerning the army, can corporations have their own army? In the past, this is what we did. So all these big companies in the past, they had their own army and they were fighting with the other armies. Would it be other companies or would it be other states? Today, among the different armies, we have to single out some of them. The biggest one is G4S. So this is a private security company, but it is not a military contractor. So the only security companies, so they are securing, I don't know, shops on Orchard Road, or they're securing something else. Okay, they don't carry weapons. Some of them do, but not all of them. However, when we look at the number of people that they have, it is more than 500,000. More than 500,000 people belonging to G4S. So they are not in the same country. They don't carry weapons. But if we are putting them in one place with the weapons, in that case, it would be a big army. So I just compared with some of the armies. So this is the G4S, and here are the biggest armies in the world. So G4S should be here between South Korea and Iran, with more than 500,000 people working for them. So of course, again, this is not a real army. They don't carry weapons. They are not in the same place, but this is the number of people that they have. The second category is the military contractors. So the military contractors, originally, they were coming from the United States. You probably know the name of Blackwater. So Blackwater doesn't exist. Now it is part of Constellis. So Constellis is the biggest private army that we have today. It is coming from the US. They have more than 16,000 workforce. So compared to G4S, it is much less. But there's people, they're highly trained and they have weapons. So you put 10,000 of them, they can stage a coup d'etat without any problem. If you put 10,000 G4S, they don't know what to do. So this is the big difference between these two categories. So we have the Americans who are present on the market. We also have the Russians. So you probably heard about Wagner Group. So the Wagner Group is today present in Ukraine. It is also present in Mali. It is present in Syria, in many places in the world. When the different states don't want to go, they ask the private company to do the job, usually a dirty job for them, because they don't want to appear and they don't want to get this liability. So you have these companies. Now, if we have a market for military contractors, and if we have private companies, so we have the Russians, we have the Americans. Who is missing on the market? The Chinese. So do we have the Chinese private contractors? Yes, we have them. So they are following One Belt, One Road. So when we have Chinese investments going abroad, they are also asking their own companies to follow them. So here you have the list of the Chinese private security companies. And on the list, what is interesting is that for some of them, we don't have full information. Look at this one, total unknown, total unknown. So we can just imagine how many people do they employ. It is becoming a market. So of course, it is not a free market. I cannot imagine that an American company or that the US State Department is engaging the Wagner Group. That would be impossible. Or the opposite, that Russia will engage Constellis, the American group, in order to work for them. But if it is a private market, in that case, we can imagine in the future that corporations will look at them. I will finish with the last element, which is the power. So when we look at the power, we usually have two types of power. We have hard power and soft power. So the hard power is usually associated with military on one side and money on the other side. So with military and money, you can coerce, you can influence, and you can force other countries to do so. The soft power, you don't use coercive measures. You don't force someone to do so, but you are influencing other partners. So it can be corporations or it can be states. So I will mention the soft power, and after that, I will mention the hard power. Concerning the soft power, I refer to one concept coming from Joseph Nye from the United States, because he was very instrumental in popularizing it. And he identified three elements of the soft power. The first one is culture, the second one is political value, and the last one is the benevolent foreign policy. So you can apply this to Singapore, for instance. So Singapore can have a specific culture, Singapore can have specific values, and Singapore can have a benevolent foreign policy. And in that case, Singapore appears like an indispensable nation. So the indispensable nation doesn't mean that you have natural resources. It doesn't mean that you have a big army, but it is indispensable for the others, for many things. If we have this concentration of companies in Singapore, there must be a reason for that. So for the states, they are using the soft power. But where is the soft power coming from, and how can you manage this? The same Joseph Nye is partnering with Meta and one division of Meta, which is called Portland, in order to give the classification of soft power countries. So according to the latest one, the number one country is France. And after that, you have United Kingdom and the others. The first Asian country appearing in the ranking is Japan. And the second one is South Korea. The third one is Singapore. and the fourth one is China. So this is according to the classification which is given by Joseph Nye and Portland. The two most important ones, that is Japan and Korea, are very interesting because they have different strategies. If you are going to Japan, Japan is launching a concept which is called Cool Japan. And Cool Japan is a state project. Within the Ministry of International Trade, they have one division, which is called Cool Japan. And this is how they are propagating the soft power of Japan. While in Korea, they don't have this. In Korea, everything is done privately. So privately is, for instance, the movies that you can see. So this is the very famous series, which is Squid Game. But you can also have movies. So this is the movie, not this one, but another one, which is Parasite. So Parasite won the Oscars, right? It's not a small reward that they get. So in Japan, it is a state project, and in Korea, it is private. So all the K-pop bands, all everything that you have, this is coming from private initiative. It doesn't come from the state. While in Japan, you have a state-sponsored project, which is Cool Japan. So I will finish now with the hard power, and after that, we can have a discussion. So for the hard power, we are looking at money. And the question is, who is more powerful? Is it the state or is it the corporation? And it's very difficult to compare because on the level of the state, I can have a certain number of indicators. So it can be GDP, it can be budget, it can be something else. On the level of the corporation, it is also very difficult because here are the different possibilities concerning valuations. We can have even more, but here are some of them. So how can I compare corporations to states? Usually, we are comparing apples and oranges, but that's the only way how we can do it. So in the first case, I am comparing the GDP to the turnover of the companies. And the classification is given here. So this is how we compare the first 50. So you have two colors. You have the black color and you have the red color. The black color is giving you the GDP of the country, and the red color is giving you the turnover. So my students, when we talk about that, and if I ask them which company is the most powerful in the world, they never quote Walmart. They quote Apple, they quote Microsoft, they quote whatever, Coca-Cola, whatever you want, but they will never quote Walmart. But Walmart is having the highest turnover in the world by far. If you are looking at the second one, which is State Grid coming from China, which is the electricity company coming from China, there is a big difference between State Grid and Walmart. So no company can approach Walmart. It is impossible. But when you ask people, they usually don't quote this. In this classification, the most important ones are states. So automatically we believe the states are very, very important, and we are right. However, when we look at the second 50, in the second 50, the dominating color is red. So it means that corporations are more important than states. So I cannot compare Walmart to China. I cannot compare Walmart to the United States, but I can easily compare it to Algeria, to Morocco, to Greece, to Ukraine, to Portugal. And in that case, the turnover of Walmart is twice or even higher when we compare to the others. Again, we are comparing apples and oranges. Huh? Don't ask me. I don't have any other option. But the GDP is not the ready money for the state. The ready money for the state is the budget. So this is the money that they can employ to something. So when you compare the budget to the revenues, it is a completely different thing. So in the top 50 now, the red color is massively present. So we can compare money. We can compare land. We can compare the number of employees. We can compare anything. So at the end of the day, we may have some corporations which believe that they're superior to the state. And we can have CEOs who believe that they are superior, more powerful than the presidents of their own country. And they behave like this. So they can be arrogant, they can be narcissistic, they can be megalomaniac, and they engage sometimes against the state. So what happens in that case? We have here one first example. It is coming from Japan. So maybe you can recognize this person here. This is Carlos Ghosn, and he used to be the CEO of Renault, Nissan, and Mitsubishi. In Japan, he was the CEO. Everyone was using him as an example of the CEO. So famous, more famous than prime minister and everything. He went to Japan, they put him in jail. So it means that the state is still more important than the corporation. You cannot play this way. The second example is this one. It is coming from South Korea. Samsung alone represents 28% of total GDP of the country. So this company can believe we are superior to anything, etc. So the family business, they're present there for quite a long time. What happened to the CEO? They put him in jail. So we cannot play against this. One third example is this one. Do you recognize this guy? He disappeared for a while. So he disappeared for a while because he started to contest the financial system in China. So suddenly, no word about him. And the last example is this one, which is coming from Saudi Arabia. So this is Prince Al-Walid. He is the richest richest private person in Saudi Arabia. They put him in jail. His jail was the Ritz-Carlton in Riyadh. It can be worse. But the Ritz-Carlton in Riyadh was the jail for him. So I will stop here just in order to say that we have many, many reasons why do we teach geopolitics in a business school. And our objective is to make people aware that and to be persuaded that if you don't want to deal with geopolitics, they will come to you. So in that case, it is important for our participants also to have this kind of training because they will face this kind of risk. In the past, it was easy because you are transferring the risk to a third party. So a third party is an insurance company. So this insurance company is proposing you some contracts. In them, we have the political risk. But all political risk is not included there. And in today's social media, we cannot do so. Why so? Because we don't have time to go through the process. In social media, if you are attacked today, you have to answer today. You cannot ask the insurance company to do this for you. So this is why today it is completely compulsory for the companies to talk about that stuff. We don't talk only about geopolitics. This is only one course. We have another course, which is also very much important. This will be economics in Asia. So I will introduce my dear colleague here to take my place here. So Jamus, if you want to join us. Thank you very much. And now I leave you with Jamus.
Thanks, Cedomir. It's always difficult to follow Cedomir, in part because he's so riveting as a speaker and also because he talks about what international relations scholars sometimes call high politics. The low politics, of course, is when we discuss economics, the irrelevant affairs of daily life, but I'll do my best. Let me just also thank all of you for taking the time either to join us online or here in person. I understand that Saturdays are precious time, and of course we have young participants to join us as well, because we all understand that all of you are busy individuals, and sometimes you have to manage multiple hats at the same time. Of course, he has been a lot more quiet and patient than my own daughter would be. So let me begin by sketching for you and asking you to imagine, if you will, the world just at the end of or the advent of the 20th century. So this is 1900. The world was in many ways very different from today, but in other ways very similar. But one thing that was very similar is that you'll see that many parts of Asia were developing. And I'll give you a sketch. Of course, those countries that are still developing today are not necessarily the same. But here is a picture of downtown Tokyo right after the bombing of the Allied bombing in 1945. The Allies, most of us are familiar with two nuclear bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. What's less known is that Tokyo, which was built mostly out of wooden construction materials, was firebombed. So this was downtown Tokyo, completely flattened in 1945. If you try to imagine what it would have been like rebuilding the society and the economy at the time, it would be hard to imagine that one day downtown Tokyo, and of course many of you, if not all of you, would have been in Tokyo in recent times, would have been completely transformed, rebuilt from the ashes of the Second World War. It wasn't limited, of course, to Tokyo, to Japan, which is, of course, the first industrial economy to have emerged out of Asia. It was also the case for its Northeast Asian neighbor. This is downtown Shanghai. Again, in 1920, downtown Shanghai actually wasn't that different from some sleepier European cities. And you can see this area, the Bund, for those of us who've been there. But if you look across, you'll notice that segment here is essentially what is today Pudong. It is marshland. They filled that land, and today the view from that marshland is skyscraping towers. It is the financial heart of not just Shanghai, but in many ways now the financial heart of China, rivaling Hong Kong. And it seems like certain administrations are doing their best to make sure that Hong Kong doesn't rival Shanghai for much longer. Now, downtown Seoul, if you look at it right during the Korean War, you'll notice that it was indeed not very built up as well. But of course, if you look at downtown Seoul today, you will notice that that transformation has also been stark. This wasn't just the case in Northeast Asia, it was also the case in Southeast Asia. This is KL in 56 before independence. And of course, if you look at KL today, the scene is marked by, of course, the prominent Petronas Towers. You guys would still be, you guys would be old enough. My students usually don't know this when I say that they filmed a film with Catherine Zeta-Jones, at this location. But again, my students don't recognize this, but at least you perhaps will. And they did so because at one point of time, the Petronas Towers were the tallest buildings in the world. Because those tallest buildings in the world have since been overtaken by another tall building. And also in Asia, this time in the West Asia. This is Sheikh Zayed Road. For those of us that have been to Dubai, you can see it's just a dusty road. And this is not too far in the past. It's 40 years. And you'll see that, of course, today, downtown Dubai has been completely transformed as well. And perhaps some of you might also recognize this port or fishing village, whichever myth you want to subscribe to. This is, of course, has been completely transformed since independence today. Now, why did I paint these pictures for you? It is in part because, of course, if you look at other parts of Asia, you will see that they are still very much developing, and they are facing challenges that come from the growing pains of development. But stark transformations in the speed in which with with which these economies transform themselves. It's a reminder that Asia has gone through what is sometimes known as an economic miracle. Now, the economic miracle belies, of course, the enormous diversity that we continue to see in the economies of Asia. And that is when I teach this course over the course of the EMBA program, I discuss how these economies are so diverse and how they differ from each other. So we have high income economies, of course, the original one, as I mentioned, Japan. The newly industrialized economies for a period they used to be called the dragon economies, so Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, and South Korea. But also the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. I think when I discuss Asian economies, I also speak about the important ones in West Asia. So GCC economies, of course, rapidly developed and benefited from the blessing of natural resources, energy resources, oil and gas. So Qatar, Bahrain, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Oman, and I'm missing something. Qatar, Bahrain, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait. Yes. So those are the 6 GCC countries. And you might say, well, they were blessed with energy resources, but you shouldn't say so because, of course, we know many other countries, principally in Africa, that were blessed with natural resources that weren't able to sustain economic development. Now, while we also want to think of fast-growing economies and what will soon be the world's largest economies, and is already by some metrics the largest economies in the world, China and India, you like to think that they are in fact very advanced economies. And if you look at pictures of downtown Shanghai or even downtown Mumbai, you would see that these rival the modern cities anywhere in the world. But of course, they have huge pockets of poverty within their countries as well. If you go to the slums in Mumbai, the largest slums in the world, or if you go to slums in Kolkata, you'll see that they remain significant challenges from an economic perspective in development in these countries. And similarly, we have this next wave of industrializers, the so-called tiger economies, Malaysia, Taiwan, Thailand, Indonesia, that has held so much promise that reached upper middle income status at a very rapid pace and were set to be, they were called the tigers because they were set to be the inheritors of the legacy, the economic legacy of the dragons. But they never quite made it to high income status. They were stuck in what sometimes economists call middle income trap. And so the question is why this has occurred. And in fact, why we also see countries like North Korea or Myanmar, for that matter, continue to languish in relative states of underdevelopment. And to help you grasp the enormity of the variation, here's the world painted in terms of GDP. Of course, it looks completely distorted, and that's, in a sense, the point. It is distorted because if you weight the different parts of the world by GDP, it's essentially unrecognizable. You have Japan, it's a very big blob here, and Europe, a big blob here. North America, understandably, is a bit overweight. And if you look at slivers of India, and even if you look at other parts of East Asia, you'll see that there is still a way to catch up for these economies. Now, one part of the story has to do with for why these economies have developed in such divergent trajectories is because these economies have also carried very, very divergent institutional structures. Part of it has been economies that sometimes rival the freest markets in the West. So Japan is one of them, although they do have a certain amount of state intervention, but overall, the economy is extremely free. And of course, Hong Kong is routinely cited as one of the freest economies in the world. But at the other end of the spectrum, you have economies like China, which officially remains in a communist country, but has perhaps deviated a little bit. And then you have those that are in transition, in part because they had a socialist past. India, for about 40 years after 30 years, 40 years after independence, essentially sustained a socialist economy. And then after the assassination of Rajiv Gandhi at the time, they started embracing more capitalistic and free market principles, and that enabled at least some of its emergence from relative underdevelopment. And of course, it would be useful to recall that just about all of Asia has a history of, and this is the case especially for Southeast Asia, has a history of colonization. Now, colonization was a very, very different experience, as Cedomir has alluded to just now, for different parts of the world, but also for different parts of Asia. For economies that were what the West considered more settlement colonies, so Hong Kong is one example of that, and of course Singapore, they had on net a much more beneficial relationship with their colonial oppressors. Then, if you look at the other side of the story, where there were extractive colonies, colonies where the Western powers came in and ultimately sought out to extract as much by way of natural resources, and ended up developing very little of both the physical capital, the infrastructure for the country, but also the human capital, the people in that country, and ultimately languishing, leaving these economies to essentially languish in the wake of the departure of these Western powers. And of course, the choice between communism, between democracies and autocracies, these were decisions that were made, of course, in the midst of the Cold War and before, but the legacies continue to haunt many of these economies today. There's an active debate among economists to try to understand whether democracy may or may not have a causal influence on long-term economic performance. So why do I sketch this picture out for you? In part because a big part of understanding Asia and Asian economies is understanding their development experience, where there were commonalities that led to their emergence and their success, and where there were divergences and what were the sources of these divergences. So for the remainder of my time with you today, before we go on to question and answers, I want to at least put some of these on the table to perhaps tantalize your intellectual taste buds before, hopefully, were you to apply to the program and join us, we can explore these ideas in much greater detail. So one feature that is common among many Asian success stories is that there was many of them experienced rapid sustained growth in per capita incomes, in part driven by this accumulation of capital. By capital, I'm referring not just to physical capital, which are the machines, the equipment, the physical plant, real estate that you see all around you, including in this gorgeous conference room, but also the human capital, the knowledge and ideas and training and experiences embedded in each one of us as individuals, in which you are seeking, were you to pursue an executive MBA. These elements, human capital and physical capital, accumulated at a very, very rapid rate across all the East Asian and increasingly South Asian success economies. So that was one key component of the model of Asian success. Another, as you can imagine, the capital has to come from somewhere, came from process of a combination of either foreign direct investment, that's what the FDI stands for, so investment from the rest of the world, excess saving from there, but also forced saving at home. So interest rates were artificially kept low, they was repressed, in part to channel these toward the accumulation of capital that could be lent to investment projects, often large-scale investment projects at relatively low interest rates to allow the development of this physical capital. So let me just give you a few pictures of that illustrate what I'm talking about. If you cast your eyes, so these are different regions in the world as classified by the World Bank. So ECA stands for Eastern Europe and Central Asia. SSA is Sub-Saharan Africa. LAC is Latin America and the Caribbean. MENA is the Middle East and North Africa. South Asia region and East Asia and the Pacific. Essentially, these three regions on the right are what we're interested in when we're thinking about Asian economies, and those on the left are those that are in the rest of the world. And what you notice, for instance, if you cast your eye on, say, Latin America and the Caribbean, you notice that in 1950, so these are 10 decadal levels of average years of schooling, you notice that Latin America and the Caribbean had almost 3 years on average of education. Now, this sounds really, really low, but you remember this is average across the population in 1950, when a large part of the population didn't even have any formal forms of education. So they had about 3 years, and as low as that was, it was higher than those of any of the other Asian regions. But of course, if you look at Latin America and the Caribbean in 2010, I don't have the latest data from 2020, but essentially East Asia has caught up with Latin America. And East Asia, by East Asia, I mean not just, of course, the economies that have managed to skim the world's top rankings in PISA, this international comparison of educational attainment, but actually even including the less averaging with the less developed countries in East Asia and the Pacific. And likewise, if you look, for instance, you compare South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, you see that Sub-Saharan Africa actually started marginally higher in terms of the levels of education there. But essentially by today, South Asia has caught up. And if you look at the rate in which this is accumulating, it would not be a surprise if they would overtake. Certainly, it has overtaken for the case of the Middle East, what we sometimes call West Asia. Now, I spoke to you about the rapid accumulation of physical capital, and you can see that. And what is interesting when you look at these graphs, so what these graphs capture are in the solid blue areas are the physical capital as measured in a common currency, in this case, the US dollar. And the lines represent the amount of physical capital as a share of output, as a share of GDP. So we're scaling this by the size of the economy. So when the lines rise, what they're saying is these economies have accumulated more and more capital. They've become more capital intensive. Machines now do a lot more of the work than just raw human labor. And essentially, you'll see this line here corresponding to Korea that was at the end of the Korean War. And you can see this rapid accumulation in physical capital in Korea. This, of course, is not unique to Korea. Essentially, at various turns of history in Asian economies' experiences, they have had the same thing. China, essentially, after so China exited the ravages of the worst of Mao era excesses in 1976 after the passing of Mao. Incidentally, also the year I was born, but maybe I shouldn't reveal how old I am. And after a period of gradually rebuilding and reallocating resources within the economy, in the 1990s, China began a process of opening up its economy with the introduction of what's sometimes known as special economic zones, of which Pudong, as I showed you earlier, is one. And they began their rapid takeoff in terms of their physical capital accumulation. India had something slightly belated. In 1990s, they began a process also. They went through a massive financial crisis in 1991. And then after a period of consolidation of the economy, they too have begun a takeoff, albeit at a slower rate. The truth is, if you look at Asia today, accumulation of capital and machinery is a huge part that explains its comparative success story. And you can see that just looking at robotic installations. So these are, if you again, I can probably cite you movies from periods where we were all alive, but perhaps my students, my undergraduate students, wouldn't be. And that you'll see that Asia accounts for about 2/3 of the industrial robots that are deployed in the world. And of that 2/3, you'll see that China accounts for half. So these economies now drive a lot of that accumulation process of capital globally. And that's a key part of what explains their rapid growth in per capita incomes. But that's the flip side. That flip side is that rapid capital accumulation has left very, very little room for the contribution of productivity. And what I mean by productivity is essentially a measure of how efficient technology or the means of production can be after you strip out everything that you have spent, right? It doesn't make sense for you if, for instance, if you've accumulated a bunch of capital, but it was a very inefficient accumulation. You invested $10 and ultimately you get capital stock that is built up that is worth about $8. That's a very, very inefficient way of investment. And as it turns out, in a key number of Asian miracle economies, the accumulation of both physical and human capital, once you strip out those contributions, had very, very low rates of productivity growth. And you can see this. This is from a study by Alwyn Young. He was an economist at the University of Chicago at the time he wrote this. I think today he's at the LSE. You can see that for the 4 so-called dragon miracle economies, once you strip out the contribution from all the other factors, a small fraction of the growth. Now, this doesn't look too bad, 2%, 1.87% in terms of growth. But remember, these were economies growing at 9% a year or 10% a year. So it's saying that essentially only a small fraction, a fifth of these economies' growth was accounted for by productivity. The rest of it was just raw sweat and labor. I'll leave you to make your own conclusions about where the country we reside in terms of their productivity growth actually stands. Now, another part of the East Asian success story, often related to us, is the openness of this region. But I'll just point out that that openness has been a very mixed bag, and a lot of that openness was a managed openness. In fact, if you look at the data, you'll see that South Asia, East Asia, even up to as recently as the 1980s, had shares of trade as a share of GDP that was below most other parts of the world. So we often think of these economies as powerhouse exporters, and this was only much more recently where they have caught up and essentially met with the rest of the world. So in fact, there are economists, heterodox economists, no doubt. One, Ha-Joon Chang, he's at Cambridge, who has argued that it's a little bit of a myth to say that these economies simply open up the floodgates to international trade and finance with nary a care, but instead, actually, the way that they ended up managing that process of opening up with carefully identified industrial policies played a large part in helping these economies go up the ladder of value added. Just one, I'm getting aware of the time, so just 1 or 2 more pictures just to whet your appetite to understanding how far Asia has come, or in a sense, why I think it's not necessarily how far Asia has come, but how far Asia has returned. If you look at, this is not in incremental, well, it's incremental, but it's not in evenly spaced intervals, but these are years. So at the time of the death of Jesus Christ, you will see, of course, in the West, everyone talks about the Roman Empire at the time. What was the Roman Empire? The Roman Empire maybe was parts of Germany that were conquered from the barbarians there. I can make fun of them because my best friend is German. France, possibly the southern part of the UK. And you can see that these were swamped in terms of the size compared to the two major empires in the east and south of Asia, India and China. And although it doesn't look that far apart, this is in logarithmic terms. So in fact, if you look at it in just nominal numbers, it's huge. And I think you can, I have a chart that puts it in a little more perspective. This is India in the tan and China in the brown. And the Roman Empire, as you can see, was just a small fraction of that. But of course, if you cast your eye to today, part of it was this industrial takeoff. This takeoff that began with the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century, first in the UK, and then spreading to the rest of the advanced economy, what today are advanced economies in the West, that has led to a world whereby that turn of the century that I started this lecture with, in 1900, you see that China and India were just a fifth of the world economy. And in fact, all these Western powers that we have become used to thinking about dominating the global economic landscape, these are the ones that dominate the conversation at the time. Now, we are starting to see a beginning of a process of the re-emergence of Asia. And that's why I say it's not so much a rise of Asia as much as a return, where now a quarter of the global economy, that was in 2008. If you look at it today, you will see that in 2010, by a different metric, US dollars, you'll see that Asian economies were still small, but by 2030, and this is my own calculations, I don't have some magic crystal ball, but by some projections, you'll see that about half of these economies, a little less than half, could ultimately be in Asia. So I think I will stop with just one final chart, and this gives you a sense of how the world's center of economic gravity is changing. In the time of Christ, it resided, because of China and India, somewhere in Central Asia. It was pulled by the economic size of these two behemoths. During the Industrial Revolution, they began to be pulled west at the height of the power, where the US dominated the global economy. It was somewhere in the mid-Atlantic before being pulled east again. And again, this is a different set of calculations. This is by McKinsey. By 2025, once again, it will reside somewhere in Central Asia. This gives you a foretaste of the world, the economic world at least, that we anticipate for the future. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, so we have some questions, huh, Johnny? Okay. Yes, so I will take the first question, which is here. What is the importance of geopolitical considerations in international business? We can have many of them, but I think that the most important one is to assess if the corporation is linked to one state or not. Because with the globalization process, the tendency was to say, we are removing all the barriers. There is no more trade barriers. There is no more problems concerning engaging people, engaging funds, engaging goods, and so on. So it means that the corporations have become free, and they were not linked to one specific country. So this is how they have behaved. But we had two problems. The first one was the election of Donald Trump in the US, and the second one was the COVID. So because of these two things, now the state is coming back. So now the state is telling you, you are French, you are Chinese, you are this, and you cannot behave like an apatride or like a company that doesn't have nationality. Since you have a nationality, it means that you are sharing the fate of this country. So if the country is telling you don't invest in Russia, you don't invest in Russia. If the country tells you don't invest in China, you don't invest in China. So we have to see now how this balance is going to continue. Will the company have freedom to do whatever they want, or will the company be like a transmission from the state, and the state will tell them what to do? So now we are in this, I would say, ambivalent situation when we don't know exactly if the company is going to be free or if the company is going to be subdued, if the company has to obey to the state. So the present situation in 2022 is that the state is back. So when the state is back, the state is putting pressure on different companies to obey in a certain way. So we have to see, I just have to remind you that when there was the election in the United States, when the different tech giants, especially messaging apps, were banning Donald Trump. So the question is, how can one company ban the president of its country? It is not a question, do you like the president or not? But at that time in Asia, people were saying, what is happening? How is it possible that the president is banned from the messaging app of his own country? So it means that at that time, this was, let's say, a period when the companies were saying, we are more powerful than the state. That is, we are more powerful than the president. But now in 2022, it is something different. So I try to answer this question here. I will not take another one, and after that, I will leave to Jamus. So the second one is the key risks today are geopolitical risk, cyber risk, and climate risk. Do you think that this risk will be crucial in the world of tomorrow? Definitely. Especially when we look at the new generations. So within ESSEC, we have different generations. So we have the executive MBA. Stanley is here. Okay, so Stanley is the young guy. But we have even younger people here, Stanley. Yeah? So we have people who are 17 or 18 years old when they're coming for the first year of BBA. And I'm teaching to them. So we are not the same generation. And I asked them this question. What is the geopolitical risk for you? And very often the climate risk happens to be the first one. So for my generation, we will talk about high politics, as Jamus Lim has indicated. But for the young people, they're thinking about the future. And they're thinking about some global trends that we have in the future. And among them, the climate risk is the most important one. So if the statesmen don't address this risk, they are losing the young population. They are losing the future voters. They are losing all the people that are building the future. So this is how this is also invited in geopolitics. Why should we talk about the climate risk in geopolitics? This is not a state affair, but it is becoming a state affair because it is a subject of concern for the young people. So, of course, we have many of scientists who contest the climate risk, but the great majority have a consensus on this. So if we have a consensus on this, and if it is a global concern, in that case, there must be a global answer to that. So this is how we are addressing it. The cyber risk is a little bit different because we had frequent discussions about the cyber risk in order to assess, is this a technological risk or is it a cultural risk? And it happened that a few months back, we were in this classroom. And we invited the person who is specializing in cyber risk on one side, and the person who is insuring the companies for the cyber risk on the other side. And the person from the technical side told us, and we were quite surprised, he told us that in 80% of cases, cyber risk is a cultural problem. It is not a technological problem. So we asked him, how come that it is a cultural problem? And he said, people make mistakes in the cyber risk. It is not a technological thing. So if people make mistakes, we have to look at the cultural side of it. And it is not machine against machine, but people make mistakes here. So when they make a mistake, this is what is happening. So we asked him, give us an example. And he gave us an example when he went to, he didn't win, but he was saying, looking at this is a USB stick, okay? So in Pentagon, they were throwing the USB sticks on the floor in the parking, 50 of them. And the experiment was to see how many people will pick this up and they will go to their computers, they will plug in order to see what is inside. More than 70%. People in the Pentagon, people who are trained in order to look at this. So you can imagine if people in the Pentagon are doing it, if I'm doing it here in the classroom, probably it will be 100%. This is how the cybersecurity is a cultural problem. According to him, it is not a technological problem. Of course, we have technological solutions, but it is a cultural problem. So this is how we are also talking about this in the classroom. Jamus, I give you for some questions.
So I want to switch gear. If anyone in the classroom has questions, if not, I will touch on two questions that have something to do with COVID. Does anyone have questions here? Let's see.
I may ask you a question later
You
on,
may.
James.
The question is, will I answer? So here's a little sketch. It includes, this is the amount of fiscal expenditures after COVID-19 for selected advanced economies, so the G7 economies, together with the large so-called BRIC economies, largest emerging economies, and then finally ASEAN economies. What you notice, beyond the fact that Japan and Singapore has obviously spent a tremendous amount of money relative to their economic sizes, is that there is a large variety of the amounts that were spent, but on balance, advanced economies, which are the ones on the left, were able to spend substantially more than those on the right. This meant that advanced economies, many of them rebounded back to their pre-COVID levels a lot more rapidly than those in emerging economies, and even those in Asia have been able to. Emerging Asia in particular has been especially hard hit in terms of the economic recoveries from COVID. Now, that said, a lot of Asian economies at the same time are parts of a global manufacturing value chain, and a lot of that manufacturing value chain is driven by electronics. And what do we do during our time stuck indoors during COVID? We bought a lot of electronic stuff. So that has helped to bolster at least part of that process. The point, I guess, about where I think Asian economies would stand after in the aftermath of COVID really depends on the confluence of factors. Some have to do with government policy, like this supportive economic policy. Some has to do with the inflation that is currently ravaging a lot of economies that were in part because of spillover effects from Western economic stimulus onto the rest of the world. And part of it has to do with their own management of the pandemic and the ability with which they were able to accept and deploy vaccination programs and then to reopen the economy. So I'm not going to go into any specific individual economy in terms of which has the biggest potential. I think you can look around and infer. Of course, in Asia, the so-called advanced economies, economies like South Korea and Singapore, as well. Well, Hong Kong is a special case, but as well as Taiwan, they have done comparatively better in terms of their recovery from COVID-19 than some other economies that were forced to shut down for extended periods of time. But in the medium to longer run, of course, economies like Vietnam are certainly poised to take over part of the mantle of manufacturing leadership that came from China. And of course, for the case of China, the biggest question, I'll throw it back to Cedomir now, because the biggest question mark there has to do with their geopolitical environment. And there, I think that it will only be another month before the
Congress
confirmation, the re-coronation of Xi Jinping as the supreme leader there, and for what would have broken from president a third term compared to his two predecessors. And I think that geopolitical risk, to go back to the links between geopolitical risk and economic and business risk, that becomes the biggest question mark for China. Some of the policies that were rolled out have been very high-handed and threatened to kill the golden goose. Some of them being the Chinese unicorns that Cedomir mentioned, in terms of how much power, economic power, these companies have been able to amass, and those uncertainties about the politics and policy really cast a shadow over Chinese prospects. Even if today the Chinese economy, while it has experienced some self-inflicted shocks because of rolling shutdowns, is still reasonably strong. But when we think about growth and development in the medium to long run, we want to think about policies that will affect how these economies will evolve in 10 years, in 15 years. And really the uncertainty about policy for me strikes me as the greatest concern in China.
If you don't have questions, I will embark on what he said before, and especially the few slides that Jamus was using about China's rising. So this was the topic in the West. So in the West, they are all talking about China's rising and how to resist to this, what to do, etc. But according to the slides given here about the 2000 year of economic history, China is not rising, China is back. But in the West, we don't realize this because we are used to the situation when we used to dominate. So we cannot understand that now someone else dominates. So we cannot understand that the US is becoming number 2 or becoming number 3 in the near future. The US can only be the number 1, okay? So this kind of situation is also structuring the narrative that we have in the West. So if China becomes number 1, it is automatically a danger for the Western countries. But my question for you is, from the Chinese perspective, do they also realize that it can be a danger for the West, or don't they care? They just follow and they say, you will have to obey because now we are stronger than you. What would you say?
So many of us will be familiar with this argument by a Harvard political scientist, Graham Allison, who cited what's sometimes referred to as the Thucydides trap. So Thucydides was a Greek historian, and he had looked at the time that of his contemporaries. He was looking at the rise of Sparta, Roman Sparta. What was it? Sparta relative to Athens. And the argument was that whenever you have a rising power that threatens the dominance of an existing power, often those nations have gone to war. And Allison's thesis was that if you look at the span of history, out of 10 cases, 8 of them will end up going to war, for instance. So the concern here is whether China and the US will be part of that 20% that don't end up going to war, or whether it'll be the other way around. I think for most of us, there's already a sense that, at least insofar as economics is concerned, there is already a form of both a cold and during the Trump administration, a hot economic war, a trade war. So I think certainly China is very sensitive. The observers of the Chinese economy are very sensitive to the possibility that China's threatening of the West can present uncomfortable situations with which you would have to deal with. But that said, if you go to China, it's almost all entirely inward looking. So much of part of it is already in policy. Xi Jinping has announced a dual circulation policy. Dual circulation is a fancy word for basically saying that they will rely on both internal and external forces for the economy, to drive the economy. And of course, the emphasis being on the internal part, to drive domestic demand, lower its saving rate, which until now has been very, very high, about 50%, to something lower so that the individual consumption can be driving a lot of economic activity internally. So I think the Chinese are trying to mature as an economy, and to allow, and that will obviously have spillover effects on the rest of Asian economies and Asian businesses as well. Because if as some of us who have tried to venture into the Chinese market may well be aware, it's exceedingly difficult to compete in the Chinese market as an outsider, and a key different. It's not that you don't have necessarily a technological advantage when you first enter the market. You could, and you may think that you have a buffer of at least 10 to 20 years ahead, but in reality, you have your buffer is 3 years. The Chinese are fantastic learners, great incremental innovators, and they'll eat your lunch in 3 years. And Singaporean companies have also learned this in the hard way. So the trick then becomes, how can Chinese growth, without international businesses necessarily venturing in as much as Chinese consumers buying from the rest of the region, how can that be a force that drives Asian business? So that would be what I would focus on, focusing on extending economic ties as a counterbalance, as a ballast to outright geopolitical conflict.
Hey, great. I like this conversation because it doesn't happen that we have two professors at the same time, coming from two disciplines that can be together in order to answer those questions. Maybe we can repeat this in the future. That would be nice. Otherwise, I'm looking at the time, so it is already 4 past 12. So maybe we should stop now, Johnny. What do you think? Huh? So we will stop this conversation now. We have some refreshments outside. Do we have refreshments? This is why they're coming. Huh? Okay, so we have some refreshments outside, so we are inviting you to go to the room outside, and we can continue the conversation. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.